Clara Evans adjusted the strap of her carry-on as she stepped into the crowded concourse of JFK Airport, her mind rehearsing little details she imagined for the week ahead. Paris, the city. She had dreamed of the place she and Ethan had planned for months. She thought about the photographs they would take near the Eiffel Tower, the cafe breakfasts, the way he might finally look at her with certainty. 5 years together, and she had convinced herself this anniversary trip meant more than just a vacation. Perhaps it would be the moment he chose permanence. The smell of coffee and perfume drifted around her voices, echoing from gate to gate, but her world narrowed to the buzz in her pocket. She pulled out her phone, expecting Ethan's voice in text form, maybe a playful line telling her he was at security. Instead, the words stunned her. "I cannot do this anymore. Do not wait for me." Her chest tightened as if someone had pressed ice against her ribs. For a moment, she believed it was a mistake that she had misread. She glanced across the sea of travelers and froze. Ethan was there, walking quickly, his hand intertwined with another woman's, their heads bent together in laughter. They moved with the ease of a couple, long comfortable with one another. Clara's breath stuttered. The ground beneath her seemed to disappear as humiliation flooded her. She wanted to shout, to run after him, but her legs carried her in the opposite direction, toward the gate number printed on the useless ticket clutched in her palm. Gate 27 was crowded with people, waiting for flights to places filled with promise. Families with restless children, couples leaning against each other with casual affection, business travelers typing efficiently. Clara sank into one of the plastic seats by the window, the glass cold against her shoulder. Outside planes moved steadily across the tarmac engines, humming crews guiding them with glowing sticks. She pressed her lips together, but tears betrayed her slipping hot against her cheeks. She tried to hide them, turning away from the family nearby. A boy whispered too loudly to his mother, asking why the lady looked so sad. The mother hushed him quickly, and Clara felt a sharp sting of shame. She dug into her bag and pulled out the small wrapped box she had carried so carefully. Inside was the watch she had chosen for Ethan, engraved with their initials and the words, "Always on my time." Her hand shook as she opened and closed it again. The gift was absurd, now meaningless a token, for a man who had discarded her like yesterday's receipt. She gripped it until her knuckles ached. Across the waiting area sat Julian Marino. Few knew his name without the armor of headlines and magazines, but here he was, simply a man, watching the seconds slip through his fingers. His dark hair fell across his forehead, his suit impeccable, though worn with fatigue. He lifted a hand to cover a cough, tucking the napkin swiftly into his pocket before anyone noticed. Then his eyes dropped to the watch on his wrist. He checked it again and again, as if each minute carried a weight. 30 days, maybe less. That was what the doctors had told him. He had not wanted this flight to be alone, but his life had made solitude inevitable. Until now. His gaze fixed on Clara, the woman unraveling quietly at gate 27. There was something unguarded in her sorrow that struck him harder than any diagnosis. She was broken in the open, while he had spent his life hiding fractures behind boardrooms and balance sheets. Clara whispered to herself that she was fine, that she would get up, that she would not humiliate herself further. But her body stayed heavy in the chair as if rooted to despair. Then the seat beside her shifted. She startled and looked up. The stranger had eyes like weathered steel, tired yet piercing, carrying both authority and vulnerability. He spoke softly, his voice measured. "You should not waste tears on someone like that." Clara blinked. "Excuse me, do I know you?" "No," he replied. "But I know what it feels like to watch time run out." She frowned, defensive. "What are you talking about?" He did not flinch. "I have 1 month to live. Do not waste your tears at a gate. Fly with me." For a long heartbeat she could not respond. This was madness. Yet in his eyes there was no mockery, only the gravity of someone who had made peace with mortality. Her pulse raced as confusion tangled with something else, something she could not name yet. That night, a stranger offered Clara not safety but a journey, and it began with 4 words: "Come with me." Clara could not believe what she had just heard. The words from the stranger's lips lingered in the air, heavier than the noise of rolling suitcases or the chatter of passengers. 1 month to live. Fly with me. She stared at him wide-eyed, trying to decide if she had been cursed to meet 2 liars in one night. But this man did not smirk, like Ethan did not look away with guilt. He met her gaze as if daring her to laugh, as if expecting her to walk away. Her throat tightened. Who says something like that to a stranger? "You are insane," she muttered, grabbing her bag. He leaned back, calmly, unfazed. Insane, maybe, but honest. His voice was steady, like someone long done with pretending. Clara stood halfway, then sat again, her knees weak. "Why would you say something like that?" He pulled a thin leather folder from his coat and placed it between them. Inside, documents lay neatly arranged, a medical summary with words she barely understood, but the words heart failure and terminal were clear enough. A driver's license with his name, Julian Marino, a passport thick with stamps. She recognized the name belatedly. Billionaire heir to a real estate empire, often on the covers of glossy magazines in grocery stores, rumored to be untouchable. She had seen his photo once on a news site, but he looked different now, thinner, older in the eyes, though no more than 33. He saw her recognition and offered a faint smile. "Yes, that one, the cold-hearted billionaire. Though my heart is not so strong anymore." She swallowed hard. "If this is true, why are you here? Why talk to me?" Julian slipped the papers back inside and closed the folder. "Because I am leaving tonight, and I do not want to do it alone." He leaned slightly closer, his tone soft but charged with urgency. "I made a list of the things I want to do before I die. 30 days. I planned to do them alone. But then I saw you. You looked like someone who just lost everything. You looked like me." Clara's jaw tightened. She thought about Ethan, about the laughter with the other woman. She thought about the 5 years thrown away with one text message. He was right. She did look like someone who had lost everything. Her chest ached, but she forced herself to speak. "You cannot just invite strangers to join your death trip." He chuckled, once a dry sound. "Call it a bucket list. Call it desperation. But tell me this. What is the worst that happens if you say yes?" She frowned. "The worst is that I regret it and waste more of my life." And the best, he countered quickly, eyes steady on hers. "The best is that you find something you did not know you needed." His voice softened, almost vulnerable. "Maybe you find yourself." Clara hugged her bag against her chest. She should walk away. She should run home and cry in her apartment until the shame numbed. She should not entertain a stranger who claimed his time was running out. Yet something inside her shifted. Perhaps it was the way he looked at her, not with pity, but recognition. Perhaps it was the fact that she had nowhere else to go, no one waiting on the other side of any door. "What exactly are you asking me?" she whispered. He straightened, clasping his trembling hands together. "Come with me tonight. I have a plane waiting. We leave for Venice first. There is a masquerade festival this week. It is on my list. I want to see the canals, to sit in a gondola under the moon. Then we go wherever the list takes us. You would have your own space, your own room, no expectations, just company." Clara stared at him. She could almost hear Ethan's voice mocking her. Reckless Clara, naive Clara, always chasing a fantasy. But what was left to lose? She had given her heart to Ethan, and he had tossed it aside like trash. At least this man was honest about the end. "Why me?" she asked again. His answer came without hesitation. "Because you looked like you needed saving too." Clara's chest constricted. Her lips parted, then closed again. She was a nurse. Saving people had always been her role. No one had ever suggested she needed saving herself. She thought about the empty apartment, the silence that would greet her if she went home. She thought about Paris, the trip that had turned to ash. She thought about the gift in her bag, the meaningless watch engraved with words now mocking her. And then she looked at him again. His gray eyes carried sorrow, but also a strange invitation, like an open door leading out of a burning building. She drew in a breath. "If I say yes, it does not mean I trust you. It only means I have nothing better to do." Julian nodded solemnly. "Fair enough. You will have your own room. You can walk away any time. But if you say yes, we leave in 20 minutes. Clara bit her lip, her heart pounding. She tried to picture herself stepping onto a private jet with a billionaire who claimed to be dying. It was insane. It was irresponsible. Yet her body leaned toward him before her mind caught up. She whispered almost to herself, "Fine." His expression softened into something almost relieved. He rose carefully, offering her his hand. "Then let us not waste another minute." She hesitated before sliding her fingers into his. His palm was warm, his touch firm, though she felt the slight tremor in his hand. Together they walked toward the private lounge entrance, the hum of the airport fading behind them. Clara did not know where this journey would take her, or if she would regret every step. But as she glanced once more at the gate where she had been abandoned, she realized regret was already behind her. What lay ahead was unknown, terrifying, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something she had never dared to imagine. Clara followed Julian through a discreet hallway that curved away from the bustling gates. The sound of the crowds dimmed until all she could hear was the echo of her own footsteps and the faint rasp of his breathing beside her. He walked with purpose, shoulders squared, but every so often his hand brushed the wall as if steadying himself. She noticed but said nothing. At the end of the corridor, a frosted glass door opened to reveal a private lounge, quiet and sleek, the air tinged with leather and citrus. An attendant greeted Julian with polished courtesy, addressing him as Mr. Marino. Clara stiffened. The name carried weight, and hearing it spoken aloud, snapped the last threads of disbelief. He was exactly who he said he was. A billionaire, and by his own admission, a dying one. They were ushered to a black car that whisked them across the tarmac under the cold starlight. Planes loomed like sleeping giants, their windows glowing faintly. At the far end of the runway, a sleek jet waited, its polished silver skin reflecting the night. The driver stopped at the base of the steps, and Julian gestured for her to go ahead. Clara hesitated, clutching her bag tighter, then climbed. Inside the cabin glowed with soft amber light. Plush leather seats faced each other, a polished table in the center, a cabinet lined with crystal glasses. It was a world away from the plastic chairs and stale pretzels of commercial flights. Clara lowered herself into a seat, cautiously, as though the opulence might vanish if she touched too much. Julian entered behind her, thanking the pilot with quiet authority. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, offering her water, asking if she needed anything. She declined quickly, overwhelmed. As the engines hummed to life, she stared at Julian across from her. He had loosened his coat, leaned back slightly, eyes half closed. Without the armor of movement and shadows, he looked younger and older at once. The fine lines around his eyes told of years of pressure, of nights spent chasing deals instead of sleep. But the slackness in his posture spoke of surrender. She finally broke the silence. "So this is real. You are really Julian Marino." He opened his eyes and met hers directly. "Real enough, though I have spent most of my life feeling like a figure in a newspaper rather than a person. And you, Clara Evans, you are realer than anyone I have met in years." She blinked, caught off guard that he knew her name. "You checked my ticket," she realized aloud. He offered the faintest smile. "Habit. When you spend years surrounded by strangers who want something, you learn to look quickly." She flushed, both unnerved and strangely flattered. The jet lifted smoothly, the pressure pushing her back against the seat. Through the oval window, New York shrank into a sprawl of glittering lights. She should have been terrified. She was on a plane with a man she had met less than an hour ago, a man who claimed he was dying. Yet instead of fear, there was a strange calm, as if she had stepped off the map of her old life and into something inevitable. After a while, Julian reached into his coat and produced a small notebook. Its pages were thick, worn scribbled with neat handwriting. He laid it on the table between them. "My bucket list," he said simply. Clara leaned forward. She scanned the entries, some ordinary, some extravagant. See Venice during Carnival. Eat ramen in Tokyo from a street stall. Ride a hot air balloon. Watch the northern lights. Kiss under fireworks. Fall in love for real. She looked up sharply at the last line. His expression did not waver. A touch of color rose in her cheeks. "That is ambitious," she murmured. "I have 30 days, he replied evenly. "Why waste them pretending?" Clara traced the edge of the notebook with her finger. "You really believe you only have a month?" He held her gaze unblinking. "I do not believe, I know. The doctors gave me their final verdict. I can extend it with surgeries, machines, a hospital bed. But that is not living, so I chose to live what remains instead." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him there was always hope. But the conviction in his voice silenced her. She had spent enough time around patients to recognize the clarity of someone who had accepted the end. Still, the nurse inside her stirred. And what if they are wrong? What if you survive longer than you expect? "Then I will consider it a gift," he said quietly. "A gift I would not have known to treasure without an ending." The engines purred steadily. Clara leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the reality wash over her. Her life had been predictable, tethered to Ethan's moods and schedules, always waiting for him to choose her. Tonight, all of that had collapsed, and in its place, she was here with a stranger who lived like each breath was borrowed. She opened her eyes again to find Julian studying her, not in the way men glanced at women in bars, but intently, like he wanted to understand her. "Why me?" she asked again, softer this time. His voice was gentle, almost a whisper. "Because I saw you drowning, and I know what it is to need someone to pull you out, even if only for a moment." She swallowed hard, her throat aching. Her fingers still clutched the gift box for Ethan inside her bag. It felt absurd now, heavy with memories already turned sour. She looked back at Julian. "If I do this, if I go with you, I need space. My own room, no expectations." "Of course," he said without hesitation. "This is not a trap. You can leave any time. You owe me nothing." The sincerity in his tone disarmed her. She nodded slowly, more to herself than him. The plane leveled in the night sky. Below, cities glittered and faded into darkness. For the first time in years, Clara felt both terrified and alive. She had stepped into a story that made no sense, and yet it was the only place she wanted to be. Julian closed his notebook and set it aside, leaning back with a weary sigh. "Get some rest," he murmured. "Venice awaits." Clara leaned her head against the seat, eyes fluttering shut, the hum of engines lulling her. Just before sleep claimed her, she thought of his words again. 30 days, 1 month. And she wondered what kind of woman she would be when those days were over. The morning light poured through the cabin windows when Clara stirred awake. For a moment she forgot where she was, disoriented by the scent of leather and the gentle vibration beneath her feet. Then she remembered, and her eyes opened fully. She was on a private jet, thousands of feet above the ground, heading to Venice, with a billionaire who claimed he had only a month left to live. Julian sat across from her, flipping through his notebook, a pen in his hand. He looked up and offered a small smile. "We will be landing soon. I hope you like masks." Clara blinked. Masks. He gestured toward the page. "Venice Carnival. It is happening now. It is on the list." She rubbed her eyes, the fatigue of heartbreak still heavy, but softened by the surrealness of this new reality. She leaned forward. "You really mean to do all of this, don't you? Every item?" Julian's expression did not falter. "Every single one. Otherwise, the 30 days mean nothing." They descended into Venice, just as the canals shimmered with reflections of morning. Clara pressed her face against the window of the boat that carried them from the airport, the salty breeze tugging at her hair. She had seen pictures of the city all her life, but reality was richer. The buildings leaned like old friends over the water bridges. Curved gracefully, gondolas swayed with the rhythm of waves. Tourists bustled. Vendors shouted music, floated through the air. Julian sat beside her sunglasses, shielding his eyes, but she noticed the way he breathed in the atmosphere, as if storing it deep within his chest. They arrived at a hotel overlooking the Grand Canal. The concierge greeted Julian with polished courtesy, barely hiding awe. Clara kept her head down, not used to such luxury. In her room, sunlight spilled across silken sheets, the balcony opening to water and sky. She set her bag down and exhaled. This was madness, and yet her heart pulsed with something she had not felt in years' anticipation. That evening, Julian knocked gently at her door. When she opened it, he held 2 masks, one black and one gold. "Carnival," he said simply. She hesitated, but then reached for the gold one. Outside, the city was alive with festival. Lanterns glowed, laughter and music filled the streets. People in elaborate costumes danced, feathers and sequins catching firelight. Clara followed Julian through the crowd, their masks rendering them anonymous. For the first time since Ethan's betrayal, she felt free of her identity. Just another face among hundreds allowed to laugh without judgment. Julian guided her to a gondola. They stepped inside the boat, rocking gently as the gondolier pushed off. The water rippled, reflecting flickers of torchlight. Clara gazed at the sky stars scattered like silver dust. She looked at Julian. His mask covered half his face, but she could still see the curve of his mouth, the way his eyes softened. "Have you done this before?" she asked. He shook his head. "I always thought there would be time." The words cut into her. She turned away, watching the buildings pass, but her heart throbbed at the reality pressed between them. Time. They returned to the square where music played and couples danced. A violin sang delicate and fierce, and Julian extended his hand to her. Clara's pulse quickened. "I do not dance well," she said. He smiled faintly. "Borrowed time dances better." His words pulled her forward. She placed her hand in his and let him guide her. They moved slowly, awkward at first, then with growing ease. The world blurred into sound and color. For a fleeting moment, she forgot his confession, forgot Ethan, forgot everything, except the warmth of his hand and the steady rhythm between them. Later, sitting at a cafe overlooking the canal, Julian ordered espresso and handed one to her. Clara sipped the bitterness sharp on her tongue. She laughed suddenly. "I never liked espresso before. Maybe I just never had it in the right place." He lifted his cup in a small salute. Sometimes it is the place, sometimes it is the company. Clara's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, hiding behind her cup. She did not want him to see how much his words affected her. The night deepened, but she felt lighter than she had in years. When they returned to the hotel, Julian paused at her door. "Thank you for coming tonight." She blinked, surprised. "You invited me." "No," he said softly, his eyes steady on hers. "You chose to." He bowed his head slightly and walked away. Clara closed the door, her chest aching. She leaned against it, whispering to herself that she should not fall, that he was a man on borrowed time. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she could still feel his hand guiding her in the dance, the warmth of his presence beside her in the gondola. She realized she had laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in years. In the darkness, Julian lay in his own room, coughing quietly into a handkerchief. Before hiding it away, he stared at the ceiling, the sound of festival music still echoing faintly through the window. His body felt weaker each day, but tonight something inside him felt stronger. For the first time since his diagnosis, he did not feel entirely alone. Clara's laughter replayed in his mind, a melody sweeter than any violin. He closed his eyes, clutching the notebook to his chest, and whispered to himself, "One day down, 29 to go." Clara woke the next morning to the soft sound of church bells echoing over the canals. For a moment she lingered in the warmth of her hotel bed, staring at the sunlight streaking across the curtains, reluctant to rise because reality felt like a dream. The laughter of last night's carnival still lingered in her memory. The glide of the gondola, Julian's steady hand as they danced, but her chest tightened when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She hesitated, then reached for it. A message from Ethan lit the screen. "I made a mistake. Please answer." Clara's throat constricted. Her thumb hovered above delete, and for a second old habits tugged at her. For 5 years she had answered his calls, his apologies, his excuses. She had bent herself into forgiveness until her soul felt brittle. But now she pressed delete. The message vanished, and with it, she felt a sharp pang of freedom. Later that morning, Julian joined her for breakfast on the terrace overlooking the water. He noticed the flicker of conflict on her face as she stirred her cappuccino. "Bad news?" he asked softly. "Just a ghost," she replied, trying to sound stronger than she felt. He nodded, understanding without pressing. Then he said, "Some men break love like glass. You deserve steel." The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked at him, meeting his gray eyes, and wondered how he always seemed to cut through her defenses. After breakfast, they boarded a flight to Paris. Clara sat by the window, watching clouds roll beneath them. Her heart twisted as she thought of how this city had once been Ethan's promise. She had imagined strolling hand in hand down cobbled streets, imagined a ring slipped onto her finger with the Eiffel Tower as backdrop. But that fantasy had already shattered. Now Paris was something else entirely, a chapter not of endings but of beginnings she could not yet name. That evening they walked along the Seine. The city glowed with golden lights, reflections shimmering on the water. Tourists leaned against the railings, lovers kissed on bridges. Clara gripped the railing, staring at the tower sparkling in the distance. Her chest ached with memories. Julian came to stand beside her. "You are quiet tonight," he observed. "This was supposed to be my dream with someone else," she admitted. "Now I do not know what it is." He turned toward the tower. "Maybe it can still be a dream, just not the one you expected." She blinked, swallowing hard. His words did not erase the past, but reshaped it, offering her a way to step forward instead of back. They walked on their silence, companionable. Later, when they returned to the hotel, Clara broke. Tears came fast, and she sank onto the sofa in her room, unable to hold them in. She hated the weakness, but could not stop. Julian followed her in, hesitating at the door before approaching. Without a word, he sat beside her and drew her into his arms. His embrace was firm, warm, steady. She clung to him, pressing her face against his chest, listening to the uneven rhythm of his heart. For a long moment, neither spoke. It was not romance, not yet, but something deeper, two broken people, holding each other upright against the weight of memories. Finally, she pulled back, embarrassed. "I am sorry." He shook his head. "Do not apologize for feeling. It means you are still alive." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she realized he was not only speaking to her. Her breath caught. The intimacy between them had shifted. Something unspoken now hovered a spark, fragile but undeniable. She wanted to deny it to protect herself, but his hand lingered on hers, his thumb brushing lightly against her skin. The contact sent a shiver through her. She did not pull away. That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. Ethan's betrayal still stung, but it no longer defined her. Julian's presence filled her thoughts, his words, his steadiness, the way he carried his own pain without letting it crush him. She realized she was no longer haunted by what she had lost, but drawn by what she might yet find. Across the hall, Julian sat by his window, coughing softly into a handkerchief before hiding it away. He looked out at the Eiffel Tower, gleaming in the distance, and felt the weight of borrowed time pressing down. Yet for the first time since the diagnosis, he felt a flicker of hope. Clara's tears on his chest, her warmth against his side, had awakened something in him he thought was long dead. He touched the notebook on the table. One more item whispered to him now. Not just fall in love, but be loved in return. As the tower lights blinked in the night, Julian whispered to himself, 2 ghosts gone, 2 hearts still here, 28 days left. He closed his eyes and let the image of Clara's face guide him into restless sleep, knowing tomorrow might bring joy or sorrow, but determined not to waste another second. The island of Santorini rose out of the sea like a painting, whitewashed buildings stacked against cliffs' domes gleaming blue beneath the blazing sun. Clara stood at the edge of the terrace of their hotel, wind tugging her hair, the Aegean glittering far below. She had never seen anything like it. Julian came beside her, his suit jacket gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man chasing a fleeting summer. She glanced at him, catching the faint tremor in his hand as he set a glass of water down. She pretended not to notice. Instead, she whispered, "It is beautiful." He followed her gaze over the horizon. "Borrowed beauty," he said quietly. "All of it borrowed like time." She looked at him, her chest tightening. She wanted to tell him not to speak that way, but the words lodged in her throat. That evening they descended into the town where lanterns swayed above narrow streets. Vendors sold olives and bread. Music floated from hidden courtyards. Julian bought her a scarf the color of the sea, draping it lightly around her shoulders. Clara laughed, protesting, but his eyes glimmered with something beyond wealth. It was as if giving her this simple gift allowed him to feel human, not a figure from magazines. As night fell, the festival began. Fireworks lit the sky, booming over the caldera, painting the darkness with red and gold. People gathered on rooftops, couples swayed to music as sparks rained down. Julian extended his hand to Clara. "Dance with me," he said. She shook her head quickly. "I do not dance well." He smiled, weary but teasing. "Borrowed time dances better." The words wrapped around her heart. She let him pull her into the circle of his arms. At first their steps were clumsy, her sandals catching against the stone, his movements slightly stiff. But then the rhythm found them. She looked up at him, firelight catching in his eyes, and something melted inside her. She had danced before with Ethan at weddings or parties, but those had felt like obligations performances. This felt like release. The world shrank until there was only his hand, steady against her back, his breath uneven near her ear, the warmth of connection growing stronger with every step. The crowd cheered as the sky exploded with color. Clara tilted her head back, laughter bubbling out. And when she looked again at Julian, the laughter faded into something heavier. His eyes were not on the fireworks, they were on her. For a moment, time stopped. The music, the voices, the crack of fireworks all dulled. He lowered his head slowly, hesitantly, as if giving her time to step away. She did not. Their lips met a kiss, both fragile and fierce. His hand cupped her face. Hers clung to his shoulder. She felt the tremor in him, the fragility of a man holding on. Yet the kiss was strong, full of longing he had denied himself. Clara's heart pounded. She kissed him back, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. The fireworks thundered above, but the real explosion was within her chest. It was not about replacing Ethan. It was not about forgetting betrayal. It was about this moment, this man, this fragile miracle. When they finally parted, both breathless, Julian's forehead rested against hers. He whispered, almost too late. Her eyes blurred. "Do not say that. We have now." He closed his eyes as if storing the words deep inside. For a while they remained still, the crowd moving around them, fireworks still scattering across the heavens. Later, back at the hotel, Clara sat on the edge of her bed lips, tingling, heart racing. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, replaying the kiss. She should have been terrified. She should have reminded herself he was dying, that she was setting herself up for devastation. But her body trembled with exhilaration, with the undeniable truth that she was falling for him. Across the hall, Julian leaned against the balcony rail, coughing into his fist, gripping the edge until his knuckles whitened. The kiss had awakened something he had buried with his diagnosis. Desire, hope, hunger for life. It was dangerous, reckless. He told himself he should have held back. Yet the memory of her lips on his banished regret. He opened his notebook, drawing a shaky line through one item. Kiss under fireworks. His hand hovered over the next. Fall in love for real. He did not mark it yet, though his heart whispered that perhaps it was already done. The next morning, Clara and Julian walked through the village streets. People greeted them. Merchants offered figs and flowers. They looked like any couple traveling, laughing softly, brushing hands as they passed. But Clara noticed Julian's pace faltering. He paused often, leaning against walls, hiding short breaths. Concern gnawed at her. She wanted to demand he rest, but he caught her hand and squeezed. "Do not pity me," he said firmly. "Share this with me. Walk beside me." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. As the day waned, they found a quiet rooftop. The sea spread endless before them, painted orange by the setting sun. Clara leaned into Julian, resting her head on his shoulder. His arm wrapped around her, anchoring her as waves of emotion surged. She thought of Ethan again, but his image no longer pierced her. That chapter had closed. This, whatever it was, burned brighter. Julian kissed the top of her head, his lips lingering against her hair. "Thank you for tonight," he murmured. "Thank you for letting me feel alive." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him that he was more alive than anyone she had ever met, that she feared losing him more than she feared her own heartbreak. But instead, she whispered, "Then let us keep living one night at a time." He pulled her closer, and for the first time since the diagnosis, Julian allowed himself to believe in something more than 30 days. He allowed himself to believe in her. Clara awoke in Santorini to the soft glow of dawn, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond her balcony. For a moment she felt cocooned in peace, but then she heard it, a muffled sound, through the thin wall separating her room from Julian's. It was coughing deep and relentless. Her heart clenched. She pressed her ear against the wall until the noise subsided. When silence returned, she sank back onto her bed, her chest heavy with dread. Later, when they set out for the day, she noticed Julian's pallor, the shadows beneath his eyes. The way he paused often, as if catching his breath. He smiled as if nothing was wrong, offering her coffee and pointing out sights, but she could not ignore it. That evening, as he excused himself to wash up, Clara entered his room quietly. On the nightstand lay a bottle of pills and a folded medical report. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. The words were blunt: terminal heart failure, palliative options, only estimated survival weeks. The truth slammed into her like a wave. He had not been exaggerating. He was dying, and soon. The door opened, and Julian froze, seeing the paper in her hands. Clara's eyes burned with tears. "You weren't kidding about 1 month," she whispered. He closed the door gently, his face unreadable. "I told you from the beginning, Clara. I only have 30 days. You let me think it was a figure of speech," she accused, her voice breaking. "You let me believe there was more time." He stepped closer, his expression soft but firm. I never lied. I just did not want you to see me as a countdown. Her tears spilled over. You should have told me everything. I am a nurse, Julian. I know what this means. I know what those words on the report mean. His hand reached for hers, but she pulled back. Anger and sorrow tangled inside her chest. She paced the room, unable to stand still. You invited me on this journey, knowing I would watch you fade day by day. You made me care, Julian. His voice dropped raw and low. I did not mean to make you care. I only wanted to feel less alone. Clara stopped, her heart tearing. She looked at him, at the faint tremor in his hands, at the resignation in his eyes. For a moment, she wanted to run to escape before the inevitable crushed her. She turned toward the door but froze, her hand trembling on the handle. Images flooded her: the gondola in Venice, the fireworks in Santorini, the way he had looked at her, as though she was the first real thing he had seen in years. She could not leave him. Not now, not ever. She turned back slowly. Her voice quivered. I should walk away, but I can't. He stepped closer, cautious, as if afraid she would shatter. Why, Clara? Why stay when the ending is written? She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze through her tears. Because I do not want you to die alone. His breath caught, and for a long moment they simply stared at each other, silence louder than words. Then he reached for her hand again. This time she let him take it. His grip was warm, trembling, desperate. He lifted it to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. I never wanted this for you, he whispered. You deserve someone who can promise forever. Clara shook her head, tears spilling. I do not need forever. I just need now. He closed his eyes, the weight of her words sinking in. He drew her against his chest, his heartbeat uneven beneath her ear. She clung to him, her tears soaking his shirt, while his arms held her as though she was the only anchor left in the world. Later, as they sat together on the balcony, Julian finally spoke. I spent my whole life building towers of glass and steel, thinking they would outlast me. And yet here I am realizing none of it matters. What matters is watching the stars with someone who sees me, not my fortune, not my name, just me. Clara turned her face toward him, her hand finding his. Then let me see you, let me stay. He squeezed her fingers gently. Then stay, Clara, but promise me one thing. When it gets bad, when I cannot walk beside you anymore, do not let my dying steal your living. She bit her lip, her heart aching. Promise me, he urged again, his voice hoarse. She nodded finally, though the promise felt like a knife. I promise. The night deepened, stars scattering above the sea. Clara rested her head on Julian's shoulder, his arm around her, both of them silent, both knowing what lay ahead, but refusing to waste the moment. Inside his notebook lay open on the table. Several items had been crossed off, but the last one written in bold remained untouched. Fall in love for real. His eyes lingered on it as he held her, and for the first time in years he let himself believe it might not remain unfinished. The following days blurred into a tapestry of places and moments, each one carrying more weight because both Clara and Julian knew the clock was ticking. They flew to Rome, where Clara stood before the Trevi fountain coins, glimmering in the water like scattered stars. Tourists jostled for space, but Julian guided her to the edge, his hand steadying her waist. Make a wish, he said softly. She closed her eyes, the cool coin pressing into her fingers. She wished not for forever, but for enough. She tossed it over her shoulder, the splash swallowed by the crowd's laughter. When she turned back, Julian's gaze was fixed on her, an unspoken understanding in his eyes. He did not throw a coin. Later in New York, they abandoned luxury and walked the streets like ordinary people. Julian insisted on hot dogs from a cart, mustard dripping onto his sleeve, as Clara laughed and wiped it with a napkin. They strolled through Central Park, blending into the anonymity of joggers and children on bicycles. It felt like another life, one without headlines, one where they could simply be two people sharing an afternoon. Clara noticed how Julian slowed often, his hand brushing hers, as if to anchor himself, but he never complained. In Iceland, the air bit with icy sharpness. Wrapped in thick coats, they stood on a black sand beach, while the northern lights unfolded above them. Green and violet ribbons danced across the sky, alive with impossible beauty. Clara's breath caught tears pricking her eyes. Julian drew her close, his arm tight around her. For once, he did not hide the tremor in his body, leaning into her as though she was the only thing keeping him upright. "It is worth everything," he whispered, "every pain, every breath for this." Clara turned her face to him, pressing her lips to his cold cheek. "You are worth everything," she said. He kissed her, then a kiss that held both fire and fragility. A kiss that trembled with the weight of knowing their time was finite. In those nights, intimacy deepened, not through passion alone, but through vulnerability. Clara found herself tracing the scar along his chest where surgery had once tried to buy him time. Julian let her touch it. His eyes closed, his breath, shuddering. He had hidden his weakness from the world, but with her he let it show. And with each confession, each tremor, she loved him more fiercely. One evening in a quiet inn tucked into the Swiss Alps, they shared wine by a crackling fire. Snow drifted outside, muffling the world. Julian's voice was low, thoughtful. "I used to believe legacy was the towers with my name, the deals signed, the wealth accumulated. But now I think legacy might be something smaller." He looked at her, then his eyes gray and burning. "It might be loving someone so completely that they carry you long after you are gone." Clara's throat closed, tears spilling despite her effort. She reached across the table and grasped his hands. "You will not be gone, Julian, not from me." He smiled faintly, squeezing her fingers. "Then promise me this. Promise you will not remember only the end. Promise you will remember the way we laughed at mustard stains, the way we kissed under fireworks, the way we threw coins into fountains. Promise me you will carry the life, not the dying." Her voice broke as she whispered, "I promise." They left the inn the next morning, but Clara carried those words like a vow etched onto her heart. The journey pressed on each destination, a miracle, each hour both gift and theft. In Barcelona, they painted each other's faces with smears of gelato, laughing until strangers joined in. In Morocco, they rode camels across red dunes at sunset, Julian's laughter echoing into the desert. In Prague, they stood beneath Gothic towers, listening to a street violinist play a melody that felt like their own story, fragile, soaring, unfinished. Yet beneath the joy shadows deepened. Clara could feel his strength waning. At times he leaned more heavily on her arm, his cough breaking through moments of silence, his skin paler beneath the lights of cities. He dismissed it with a wry smile, but she noticed. Every night she watched him breathe, fear curling in her chest. That morning might not come, still they pressed forward, because borrowed time was not meant to be hoarded, but spent recklessly, lavishly, gloriously. One evening in a quiet square in Lisbon, Clara whispered as they sat side by side. Why me, Julian? Out of everyone, why did you ask me? He looked at her eyes, shimmering with fatigue, but fierce with truth. Because you looked like someone who needed to be reminded she was more than the man who left her at gate 27. Because you looked like someone who could teach me how to love, even if only once. She pressed her hand against his cheek, her tears falling freely. Then let me teach you, she whispered, and let me learn from you. Their lips met again, slow and tender, a seal of everything they had not said. The kiss tasted of salt from her tears and of fire from his soul. It was then Clara realized the truth. She was no longer accompanying him on his last journey. She was falling in love with him, not despite the borrowed time, but because of it. Each fragile day carved into her the depth of what it meant to love fully, fiercely, without guarantee. And though fear gnawed at her, she clung to the certainty that love, even brief, was worth more than a lifetime of half-hearted promises. As their plane lifted again, carrying them to the next destination on his list, Clara looked at Julian across the cabin. His head rested back, eyes closed, but a small smile played on his lips. She whispered into the hum of engines, knowing he could not hear. I am falling, Julian. I am falling, and I do not regret it. Outside the window, the stars wheeled indifferent yet eternal, while inside the cabin, two souls lived as if eternity could be found in 30 days. The warning came on a night that should have been perfect. They were in Vienna, the opera house glowing with chandeliers, music swelling in the gilded hall. Clara wore a borrowed dress that made her feel like someone out of another life, Julian beside her in a tuxedo that accentuated the sharp lines of his face. For a few hours she let herself believe the fairy tale. But midway through the second act, Julian stiffened beside her. His breath hitched, his hand clutched at his chest. Clara turned, instantly panic surging. Julian, what is it? He tried to wave her off, his lips tightening, but the color drained from his face. Before she could call for help, he slumped, his body trembling. People around them gasped, ushers rushing forward. Clara dropped to her knees in the aisle, her nurse instincts snapping into place, even as fear choked her. Stay with me, Julian. She begged, her hands gripping his, as his eyes fluttered closed. He was rushed to a private clinic under his family's name, doctors, waiting as though they had been warned this day would come. Clara paced the sterile hallway, her stomach in knots, refusing to let go of the image of his collapse. When a physician finally approached her, world narrowed to his words. His condition is deteriorating faster than projected. There is one option, an experimental procedure, risky, low chance of survival, but without it. Clara's knees almost buckled. Without it, he will not last the month. She pressed her hand against her mouth. The doctor continued. He has refused in the past. He believes it is better to die on his own terms. Clara nodded numbly, but when she was allowed into Julian's room, she was not prepared for the sight of him, pale against white sheets, tubes running from his arms. His eyes opened as she entered, and a faint smile tugged at his lips. Borrowed time catches up, he murmured. She collapsed into the chair beside him, clutching his hand. Do not joke about this. You scared me half to death. He lifted her hand weakly, pressing it to his cheek. I am sorry. I wanted to give you only the beautiful parts. You do not get to decide that. She snapped, tears spilling over. You do not get to choose to leave me like this. He closed his eyes, exhausted. Clara, I do not want to spend what is left strapped to machines. I want to live, not just survive." Her heart splintered. "And what if you live?" she whispered fiercely. "What if you survive this surgery? What if we have more than 30 days?" He turned his face toward her, his gaze raw, torn between resignation and longing. "If I die on the table, then our story ends in a hospital instead of under the stars. I cannot do that to you." She leaned forward, her forehead pressing to his, her tears mingling with his breath. "And if you live, Julian, if you live, you give us a chance. You give me a chance to love you longer. Do not take that from me." His chest shook, a ragged breath breaking through. His voice was hoarse. "You would carry that risk, knowing you might lose me in a moment." Clara's voice rose, cracking with pain. "I would rather risk losing you trying than lose you because you gave up. Do not make me watch you choose death when there is a chance at life." For the first time since she had met him, Julian's composure cracked. His eyes glistened, his jaw trembling. He reached for her face, his thumb brushing her tears. He whispered, "I am so tired of fighting time." "Then let me fight with you," she begged. "Please." For a long moment, silence filled the room, heavy with the weight of choice. Then Julian closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. "For you, Clara, for us, I will try." Relief and terror collided in her chest. She kissed his forehead, her lips lingering. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not leaving me yet." The doctors prepared for surgery, a whirlwind of consent forms and urgent arrangements. Clara remained by his side until the last moment, holding his hand as they wheeled him toward the operating room. His grip was weak but insistent. "If I do not wake, remember the fireworks. Remember the fountain. Do not remember this." Her tears streamed freely. "You will wake," she said fiercely. "You will." He smiled faintly, his lips barely moving. Borrowed time, dances better. Then he was gone through the double doors, swallowed by sterile light. Hours stretched into eternity. Clara sat hunched in a plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly around his notebook. She read the list over and over, each item a reminder of their whirlwind journey, each line a prayer that it would not end tonight. Fall in love for real, stared back at her uncrossed. She pressed her lips to the page and whispered, "He already did. He already has." When the surgeon finally emerged, Clara leapt to her feet, her heart in her throat. The doctor's expression was grave, but not hopeless. He survived the procedure. It will be a long recovery, but he made it through. Clara broke her knees, giving way, sobs shaking her, as relief crashed through her. She pressed her hand against her heart, whispering thanks to every power that might have been listening. Hours later, she sat at his bedside, his body still pale but alive machines steady in their rhythm. She took his hand in both of hers and pressed it to her cheek. "You fought," she whispered. "You gave us a chance. I will never let you regret it." His eyelids fluttered, a weak smile ghosting his lips. "Not yet, but soon." Clara kissed his hand, tears dripping onto his skin. For the first time, she let herself imagine not just 30 days, but perhaps 30 months, 30 years. And in that fragile hospital room, love against time became love demanding more time. A love no longer willing to surrender without a fight. The seasons turned while Julian recovered. Clara stayed by his side through the endless days of hospital corridors and quiet nights broken by machines beeping through the fragile steps of rehabilitation when his body trembled with each attempt to reclaim strength. She became not just his companion, but his anchor steady when fear gnawed at him, fierce when doubt tried to steal his resolve. A year later, they were back in New York, not in a penthouse or skyscraper, but in a modest apartment overlooking a tree-lined street. The billionaire who had once commanded boardrooms now spent mornings brewing coffee in the kitchen sleeves, rolled up humming faintly as Clara laughed at his attempts to cook pancakes. He burned them often, yet insisted on trying again each imperfect circle, a declaration that he was still alive, that borrowed time had become something more. Julian had stepped away from his empire, leaving the constant pressure behind. His fortune remained, but his hunger for more had dissolved. What he wanted now was Clara's hand across the table, the sound of her laughter echoing in rooms once filled with silence. Their days were simple, woven with the kind of joy that had nothing to do with wealth, walking through Central Park, watching old movies on rainy nights, sharing ice cream from the same spoon. And yet beneath the simplicity lay something profound. They both knew how close they had come to losing everything. That knowledge colored each kiss, each shared glance, each quiet evening together. On the anniversary of the surgery, Julian took Clara to the diner where they had once stopped for pancakes during their whirlwind journey. The neon sign still flickered, the booth still cracked with age, but to them it felt sacred. Julian fumbled in his jacket, his fingers trembling not from weakness but nerves. Clara tilted her head, curious, and then her breath caught as he set a small velvet box on the table. Her eyes widened. "Julian, you—" His voice was unsteady but resolute. "I once told you I only had 30 days, and you gave me more than I ever thought possible. You gave me hope, you gave me laughter, you gave me love. I do not want borrowed time anymore. I want forever." He opened the box. Inside lay a simple ring, nothing ostentatious, nothing of billionaire glitter, just a band that spoke of constancy. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling instantly. She shook her head, overwhelmed. "You do not need to prove anything, Julian. You already gave me everything." He reached across the table, taking her trembling hand in his. "I want to give you my name, my life, my days, however many remain. Not because I am dying, but because living with you is the only thing that makes sense." Her tears turned into laughter, a choked, joyous sound. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Julian, yes." The entire diner erupted in applause, strangers smiling as though they too understood the miracle unfolding. Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking, and Clara leaned across the table to kiss him, tasting salt and sweetness, the world narrowing to just them. Their wedding was small, intimate, filled not with grandeur but with meaning. Friends and a few family members gathered in a garden strung with fairy lights. Clara wore a simple gown, Julian a suit, tailored not to impress, but to fit the man he had become. When he said his vows, his voice broke. "I once thought my life was measured in buildings and billions. Then I met you and I realized my life is measured in moments. Thank you for giving me yours." Clara's vows were through tears. You turned borrowed time into forever. "I will spend every day reminding you that we did not lose. We won." When they kissed, applause rippled through the garden, but all Clara felt was the steady beat of his heart against hers, stronger than it had ever been. The months after were filled with the quiet joy of marriage. They traveled still, but no longer to tick boxes on a list. They traveled to make memories, to hold hands on cobblestone streets, to share meals in tucked-away cafes, to laugh at missed trains and language barriers. In every city, Clara took photos not of monuments, but of Julian's smile, of the way he looked at her as though she was the only landmark worth remembering. And though shadows lingered, every cough made her flinch. Every doctor's appointment tightened her chest. They lived in defiance of fear, because they had already beaten it once. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from their balcony, Julian turned to her, his expression soft. "Do you ever think about Gate 27? Clara smiled faintly, squeezing his hand. "Every day. It was the worst moment of my life and the best. Because if Ethan had not walked away, I never would have found you." Julian kissed her hand. "Then I will thank him in my prayers for being foolish enough to leave you waiting." She laughed through tears, leaning into him. They sat in silence as the sky burned orange, the city humming below. Clara thought of the notebook that still rested in a drawer, most of its entries crossed off, yet one line stood out above the rest: "Fall in love for real." She looked at Julian, her heart swelling, and knew the line had not only been fulfilled, but rewritten. They had not just fallen in love, they had built a life. Borrowed time had given way to forever, not because the future was endless, but because each day they chose to love as though it was their last. And in that choice lay eternity. 1 year after the wedding, Clara found herself standing in their small living room, surrounded by boxes filled with letters and photographs from the past year. Julian was at the desk, carefully sealing an envelope with a wax stamp. His hands still trembled faintly, though his health had improved, but his eyes carried the steady calm of a man who had faced death and chosen to keep living. Clara came closer, curiosity lighting her face. "What is that?" she asked softly. Julian looked up and smiled faintly, handing her the envelope. "For you." She frowned, sliding her finger beneath the flap. Inside was a letter, handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. She began to read, and the words struck her like lightning. "My Clara, if you are reading this, it means the surgery failed, and I am gone. I wrote this before they wheeled me into the operating room. I was afraid you would never hear what I needed to say. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to come with me. Thank you for giving a dying man 30 days of life brighter than 30 years. If I am gone, promise me you will not bury yourself in grief. Promise me you will keep laughing, keep traveling, keep loving, because you deserve the whole world." Clara's tears blurred the ink. She looked up at him, her voice breaking. "You wrote this before?" He nodded slowly. "I did not want you to find it then, but now it feels right for you to know." She pressed the letter against her chest, her tears falling freely. She leaned down and kissed him, fierce and trembling. "You are here, Julian. You are here." He held her close, whispering against her hair. "I am, but I want you to know that even if I hadn't made it, loving you would have been enough." She closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of his words. Over the next weeks, Julian began speaking often of legacy, of wanting their story to ripple beyond their own lives. One evening he told Clara his idea. "I want to start a foundation for people like me, for those who do not have time but still have dreams." Clara's eyes widened. "A foundation? Borrowed time," he said quietly. "A place that helps patients with terminal diagnoses fulfill their bucket lists." Clara's throat closed with emotion. She reached for his hand. "That is beautiful. Let's do it." And so they began. Together they poured Julian's fortune into building something new, not towers of glass, but a network of compassion. They met with doctors, hospitals, families. Stories poured in an elderly man who wanted to ride a horse, one last time a mother who longed to see the ocean before she died a child whose dream was to meet her favorite baseball player. Each request reminded Clara of those 30 days of gondolas and fireworks and northern lights, of how fleeting moments could carve eternity into a heart. When the Borrowed Time Foundation finally launched, the event was small but filled with warmth. Survivors, patients, families gathered in a hall decorated with photos of journeys completed. Clara stood at the podium, her voice steady, though her hands shook. She read from Julian's old letter, her words echoing in the quiet room. "We cannot buy time, but we can choose what to do with the time we have." Her eyes sought Julian in the front row. He sat with his cane resting beside him, still fragile but alive, his eyes glistening. She finished, her voice breaking. "Love gave us borrowed time, and we turned it into forever." The room erupted in applause, some people standing, others wiping tears. Clara stepped down, and Julian rose slowly to meet her. He kissed her hand before the entire crowd whispering, "You did it, Clara. You turned my 30 days into a lifetime." Later that night, they walked hand in hand along the street, the air cool and sharp. Clara leaned against him, her heart overflowing. She thought of all the sacrifices they had made, her walking away from a prestigious nursing opportunity in Boston, because she could not leave him giving up an empire for simplicity, both of them choosing to anchor their lives in each other rather than ambition. These were not losses but transformations, trade-offs that made their love deeper. She stopped beneath a lamppost, turning to him. "Julian, do you ever regret not staying in the world you built before?" He shook his head firmly. "No, that world gave me nothing compared to this. I built towers and contracts, but none of it held me at night. None of it laughed with me in gondolas or kissed me under fireworks." He touched her cheek gently. "My only regret would have been not asking you at gate 27. She smiled through tears, her hands clutching his coat. "Then we will keep living every day for as long as time allows." Months passed, and the foundation grew, touching lives across the country. Julian and Clara traveled not as tourists, but as witnesses, watching dreams come true for others, each story weaving into theirs. Sometimes Julian's health faltered, forcing him to rest for weeks, but Clara never left his side. Each setback was a reminder that time was still precious, but neither surrendered to fear. They had already learned how to make every moment count. One evening, as they watched the sun sink into the horizon, Clara whispered, "You once asked me to promise I would live if you were gone." He nodded, his eyes steady. "And I did, but I never thought about the sacrifice you made. You gave up everything you built for me." He smiled faintly. "It was not a sacrifice, it was freedom." She pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "Then let us never forget what we gave each other." He kissed her softly, sealing the vow. Years later, when people spoke of Julian Marino, they did not speak of skyscrapers or fortunes. They spoke of the foundation that granted last wishes of the couple who had turned borrowed time into a legacy of love. And when Clara looked back, she did not remember only the hospital rooms or the pain. She remembered the scarf he had placed on her shoulders in Venice, the mustard stain she had wiped off his sleeve in New York, the way his hand trembled as he asked her to marry him in a diner. She remembered love raw and fragile, yet stronger than fear. On their anniversary, they returned to the airport, standing before Gate 27. The terminal bustled with travelers' announcements echoing overhead. Clara stood still, her heart thudding as she looked at the very place where it had all begun. Julian took her hand, his voice warm. "This was where you were abandoned, but to me, this was where I was found." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she turned to him. "And where I was saved." They stood together, hand in hand, letting the world rush around them. The past was behind, the future uncertain, but the present was theirs. Julian kissed her temple and whispered, "We borrowed time, Clara, and we turned it into forever." What would you do if you only had 30 days left to live? Would you waste them on regret, or would you risk everything for love? Clara was left behind at an airport, heartbroken and humiliated. Yet in that very place, she met a man who had only 1 month to live, and together they turned borrowed time into forever. Their story reminds us all that love is not measured in years, but in moments, in the laughter, shared over a burnt pancake, in the kiss stolen, under fireworks, in the promise, whispered when the world says there is no time left. Sometimes the greatest love story is not the one that lasts the longest, but the one that burns brightest when you least expect it. If this story touched your heart, if you found yourself crying for Clara and Julian, then ask yourself, who is the person you would choose? If tomorrow was your last day, do not wait for time to run out before you say, "I love you." Do not wait for perfect conditions to live. The truth is, we are all on borrowed time. But like Clara and Julian, we have the power to make it beautiful, to turn heartbreak into hope, to turn loss into legacy tonight. Hug someone tighter. Call the person you have been meaning to forgive. Take the trip you have been postponing, love without guarantee. Because forever is not promised, but love makes every second eternal. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in second chances, who needs to remember that life is fragile but also breathtaking. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and how this story moved you. And if you cried, know you are not alone, we did too. Together, let us keep alive the message of Clara and Julian, that even in the shadow of death, love can be the light that saves us all.